everybody, welcome back. I am Tara T with Old Soul Factory, here to provide you with another YouTube video for this week. Today we're talking about something that confused me quite a lot whenever I first started crocheting, and that is reading patterns. If you've ever pulled up an actual pattern and thought, what in the world is this language? You are so not alone, and I want to go over some of the basics about patterns, the formatting, and all of those things for all of the beginners over here on this channel, so you guys can learn a bit about how to read patterns, because if you're like me, you used to avoid them and only watch tutorials on people actually crocheting, because reading a pattern literally feels like a totally different language. But the good news is once you learn some of the abbreviations and those little tricks and tips and stuff, it's basically like reading a recipe whenever you're cooking. You'll totally understand it, and then you can literally make anything. So today I'll walk you step by step through how to read a pattern and process a pattern, kind of what some of the abbreviations are that are commonly used in US terms, I will say, but we'll go over what that means in a little bit, and also some of the tricks and the tips that I have learned along the way that I think personally helped me. Now, if you're thinking, what does this girl have to teach me and all of these things? I've been crocheting for years now. I know how to read patterns. I've made patterns of my own. I sell them over on my Etsy store. I've released free patterns over on my Instagram at Old Soul Factory Crochet. I do patterns, okay? I do patterns. I've done it for a while, but again, I am also just a self-taught crocheter. I've been crocheting for years now though, so take everything I say with a small grain of salt, okay? If I give a tip that is not your opinion, I am so sorry, but you can feel free to ignore those opinions because everybody has their own opinions. Okay, so let's start with the basic format of an actual pattern here. Usually when people create patterns, one of the first things you see is obviously a little intro page. Usually the first page usually tells you what the pattern name is, the designer, and commonly has their social media handles and those kinds of things on it. This is pretty easy to skip over as well. It's usually just a very basic thing. I know a lot of people keep their patterns printed off in binders and such, so this just keeps a blank page on the front of those little sheets and packages that they want to keep together, so they know what the pattern actually is before they get started. And also it is very handy to have the name of the pattern on the front page. I've seen a couple of patterns now that actually don't have this for some reason, and it's on their second or third page even. This is really confusing because then whenever I go back to do that pattern, I can never remember the names of them, because guess what, it wasn't on the front, which is usually the page you see the most often whenever you pull up a pattern. So usually you also have a materials list, but this is usually what mine look like. It usually tells you what hook size you're going to be needing, what yarn type I used for the pattern, or what I at least suggest. Again, you can always size up or size down your hook size, even if you buy a acrylic pattern but you have burnout yarn, like a weight 5 yarn and 5mm hook, you can always size up patterns or size down patterns based on your tension and stuff too, which is also very helpful to know as well, because I've definitely done that a few times. Depending on what kind of pattern you are doing as well, if you're doing a plushie or if you're doing a wearable and stuff, there's commonly also some kind of gauge in a pattern. Usually they have you work up a 4x4 little square or something with the yarn and the hook size that they used. So if your square is a little bit smaller, then you might want to size up your hook, or if your square turned out too big, you might want to downsize your hook just a little bit. Everybody's tension's different, so especially if you're doing wearables, this is really important to actually do. That way your sizing will be correct whenever you get down with your final product. Again, I will say I mostly do plushies, as you can tell by my channel, but I have done a few wearables before, and I commonly also do the swatches as well, because like I said, I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours on a cardigan for it to turn out toddler sized. This is also the section that if a pattern designer has some sort of specialty stitch that they commonly use, or if they've kind of created their own stitch, or they have their own way of interpreting a stitch, this is also where they tend to put all of that information in there. So it's very helpful to read over these sections before actually starting a pattern. I know that I've seen a lot of patterns use bobble stitches, of course. We all love bobble stitches over here, especially if you don't like sewing. Most of those patterns I feel have bobble stitches for feet or legs or those kinds of things. It is really important to read this though. Lots of times pattern designers will put in parentheses like how many loops they have for their bobble stitches, because some people do like 4, some people do 5, some people do 6, you know, so I think it's good to be specific on those kinds of things sometimes. I know I want to go back and make sure on my next few patterns that I have that noted, because usually I personally always do 5, and then after like a year of crocheting I realized that there's so many creators that do 4, or I watched tutorials and they did 6. So definitely look into that too, because it'll affect the way that your stitches turn out a little bit too, and you want it to be the same, of course. Then of course you have the actual instructions section of the pattern. This is where it'll break down what pieces you're making, how many pieces you'll need, how many pieces you have to sew together. It'll have the assembly at the end as well. It'll hopefully have a lot of pictures on how to do all of these things, or what these little finished pieces may look like as you're working as well. So I commonly, whenever I first download a pattern, read through everything: the materials list, the gauges, the instructions, and the actual pattern itself. I read through everything, or at least I tend to, but if it's a pattern designer I know and trust, I don't tend to do that all the time, I will admit. But I try to skim through everything and make sure that I at least understand what I'm getting myself into. I also make sure I have all the colors, the hooks, everything that I will possibly need to make this happen. Another thing to note is make sure that you read the materials list for safety eyes as well. All of these plushie patterns I work on have all different kinds of sized eyes and stuff that you need to turn out the specific cuteness of a pattern. So make sure you're reading and looking for that as well ahead of time. That way you'll know what size eyes to go ahead and prep or get out of your little storage box, because I have a big box of eyes and sometimes it takes a while. If I finally get to where the eyes are at and then I have to dig through like my whole safety eye box and storage box to find like the perfect size eyes, sometimes that takes a while. So I like to get everything out usually before I start a project. Another tip is you do not have to print out these patterns. I know that like a pattern feels like a very physical thing to some people, but you do not have to print these out. Personally, I don't actually print out my patterns. I keep them all on my computer or my tablet or my phone or some electronic device so I can zoom in. I love zooming in. I can also, you know, just take my little mouse and highlight whichever row I'm on as well, which is very helpful too. I can also have my little, you know, Google Documents open and be clicking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on whatever like row I'm in out of however many I need to get done. Especially on like the loaf cats, I know that I tend to do that too, because there's a lot of rows of single crochets. I think it's 6 in the middle maybe, and so sometimes I know I can go back and count them, but if I'm in a groove, I just want to click that little number on my keyboard and just move on and keep going and going and going instead of having to go back and count them. Especially if I'm using a really dark yarn or something, sometimes I just want to, it's a good option to have. So if you don't have the means to print them, don't worry. There's a lot of people that just keep them electronically on their computer. Honestly, I would love to know from you. Do you print off your patterns and like keep them in a binder, or do you just keep them on your tablet, like all stored up together? Because that's what I do. Now, the next part is the part that scares away everybody, I feel like, from actually sitting down and reading a pattern. But I promise, once you know it, it'll be stuck up here in your little noggin, okay? But again, this is the part that I want you to note too. These are US terms, okay? So there's UK terms, there's US terms, and I'm sure there's other terms, but those are usually the most commonly used, I feel like, are those two. They have 2 different little graphs for them, okay? So the single crochets and the single crochets over here are not the same thing, okay? It's basically like UK is like a stitch bigger than what it actually is in like the US terms, right? So like a double crochet is like a single crochet in US terms. So it gets a little confusing. So make sure you're also reading that part before you start your pattern, which, like I said, is important to note in the instructions and everything before you actually get into the pattern. Almost every single creator will put US terms on there, okay? Or if you download it from like Etsy or something, they'll have it in the description too of the listing usually. So it'll be out there somewhere, I'm sure. You just got to look at the pattern, okay? So first, I'm going to go over just a few quick and easy simple terms for all of us so we can just speed run this. These are simple, these are easy. There's lots of tutorials out there for all of these stitches, and these are the most commonly used ones. Like I said, there's other stitches, okay? There's other stitches. I'm going to go over the common ones that you'll most likely find in a pattern, okay? So first off, you have chain. It's just CH, nice, simple, easy. SC is single crochet. DC is double crochet. HDC is a half double crochet, where you have to have an extra like loop on your yarn before you start your stitch. A treble crochet or a triple crochet. Some people call it both. I usually call it a triple, I feel like, usually, but it's most commonly known as a treble crochet. It's basically just a 3-stacked crochet. Again, you can find tutorials and stuff out there for those, but I do use those in some of my patterns as well. A slip stitch, often found right before you like fasten off your project kind of deal. There's also INC, which is an increase. This will be 2 single crochets commonly in the same stitch. There's also different kinds of increases, but usually those are always noted in the pattern too, or like I said, in like the little abbreviations section before you actually get into the pattern. There is a decrease, and there's also an INV decrease. So these two are not quite the same thing. A decrease, you go through both stitches when you're working your decrease, but an invisible decrease, you only use the front loops only. It kind of helps cleanly fasten off your yarn or your head or whatever body part that you're working on kind of deal. Hide your stitches a little bit better in case your tension's a little off and stuff. I usually only do regular decreases until I'm going to like the very last row before I close up a plushie, but that's just personal preference. So I don't always do that, even if it says to do that sometimes, but that's just because I know my tension and stuff and I can get away with it. REP is repeat. This is commonly also noted with like parentheses or like those brackets and stuff, but like I said, that's usually noted in the abbreviations as well on which ones that they use as well. And then RND or RD or row refers to like the round that you're on. Commonly also people just put an R and then whatever number you're working on. You'll see this at the beginning of like the pattern steps, and it'll be like R1, R2, R3, R4. That's how mine are also set up. That's what I personally like to do, is just put the R. But again, that's kind of preference, but it's basically just like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So that's all you really need to know. I put a link down below as well for a Canva link. If you want to click that down in the description, you can also download this quick and easy little pattern chart that tells you what everything means. And it also has the actual like graph stitches next to it as well. If you read pattern graphs like granny square graphs and stuff like that, it's a whole pattern that's already laid out like on a square. Let me see if I actually have one that I can put on the screen really quick. Okay, yeah, so like this would be a graph and it tells you like what all of the stitches are. So I went ahead and put the name of the stitch, the abbreviation, and the graph stitch as well next to it in US terms, like I said, and I included all the stitches I just talked about down below in the link. So you could also Google this as well, and there's lots of abbreviation charts out there as well. And the last term that I want to go over, because I think it's specifically used quite often for plushie patterns, and I think that people kind of forget to include this sometimes in their abbreviation charts and stuff, is FLO is front loop only and BLO is back loop only. So whenever you make a stitch, you have a V at the top of your stitch and you have a stitch that's closer to you, or not a stitch, but you have a loop that's closer to you, and you have the back of the V whenever you're working on a pattern or a plushie. And so the closest one to you is the front loop only, and the back one is the back loop only, of course. So sometimes patterns have you do rows where you only work in the back loops or you only work in the front loops. This kind of helps create almost like a border or a crease kind of in a pattern if you're trying to like define different sections, or you're getting ready to close something off that has a flat bottom. Sometimes they'll usually do front loop only, and then you'll do like back loop decreases to kind of bring that plushie in and give it like a little ledge almost. So keep an eye out for that in your patterns as well, but that's super easy. You just work in the front loops or you just work in the back loops during that row. So I'm going to go over this quick little pattern. This is one of my free patterns that's over on my Instagram at Old Soul Factory Crochet again. I've talked about this a few times in the last few weeks, so I won't hit on it too much, but this is Fern the Frog. We're going to talk about some of the stitches really quickly and just break down a few more things in case I missed anything in the abbreviations chart and stuff. So let's just get into it. So again, this is a plushie pattern. It might be slightly different than an actual wearables pattern. Construction of those two are totally different. Usually I feel like for wearables, you usually start with like a chain and then you work up in some kind of form. But for plushies, 9 times out of 10, you're usually working in the round, so you just keep going instead of like reaching an end and turning and going back kind of deal. But you will learn about that as you also learn about crochet. You can see that I put R1, 8, SC in MR, and then in the parentheses I put 8. So this is going to be row 1. There's going to be 8 single crochets in a magic ring, which I don't think I mentioned that in the abbreviations part, but that's like one of the first things you really learn as a crocheter, I feel like. But MC or MR, but I always use MR for magic ring. And then the parentheses at the end of every line tells you how many stitches total you should have after you finish that row. This is really helpful if you're a beginner as well, to be able to go back and count how many stitches you have. I did this all the time when I first started, so definitely keep that in mind. As you can see, the next row is 8 INC, which is increases. And again, if you double them, because there's 2 stitches in every stitch, so there's going to be 16 stitches whenever you end up finishing this row. And then I'll go over one more for you real quick, and that is the next one, row 3. As you can see, there's parentheses and then there's a times 8. So usually if this happens, like I said, you usually put this in like the description page kind of deal, but this means that you're going to repeat anything that's inside of that parentheses 8 times. So you're going to repeat that part of the pattern 8 times. So 8 times you're going to do 1 single crochet, you're going to do 1 increase, and then like I said, 8 times, and then you'll end up with 24 stitches. So there's often times like row 7 has leg, tongue, leg in it, and as you can see at the bottom of that pattern, it tells you exactly what that is. Oftentimes pattern designers do that so it's not too wordy and too hard to read, I guess I would say. So like the leg is going to be down there at the bottom, and you'll see exactly what you're going to do in the next 3 stitches. That's basically the rundown of how to actually read the pattern and stuff. Again, if you see any discrepancies kind of between patterns, that's because every designer is a little bit different. Everybody puts their own little spin on it, or they also learned differently in those kinds of things, so they might do little things that are slightly different, but I can guarantee you if you Google it or you look at their abbreviations or note section, it will tell you what it means. Like some people put this for a decrease and other people put this for a decrease. Like it's really hard to like memorize all of the little ins and outs when it comes to those 2 little things, but like I said, 9 times out of 10 you can Google it. Now let's talk about a few little tips that I feel like for any beginner would be super helpful, because I definitely made these mistakes when I started and I really wish I knew them sooner. Please check your stitch counts as you go. I can't tell you how many times, especially when I started, that I went through and did like 3 or 4 rows and then I realized like, hey, my count looks kind of off, or this looks too big or something, and then I would go back and count, and then I would have to frog or take out those 3 rows and get back to the one little tiny spot where I made a mistake. So definitely make sure you're using your stitch marker, okay, and you're counting your stitches as you go, even if you have to count them out loud. I've definitely done that lots and lots of times, but it does make it easier, and eventually you'll just start doing it in your head instead of doing it out loud, which I feel like also really helps. Do not forget your repeats. Like I just said, in those parentheses, you had to do it 8 times. Make sure that you're reading that number right and that you're doing it all 8 times, and you're not just doing it and then taking your stitch marker out after the first like increase or whatever, single crochet and then increase, and then putting your stitch marker back in, because you are missing like the majority of that round. Like almost every single pattern and almost every single round will have you go back exactly to where you started, right where your stitch marker left off. So you need to make sure that you're keeping track of that stitch marker. If a pattern, like actually sitting down to read a pattern, is still overwhelming to you, here's a few things as well that you can do that I definitely did that I thought made it a little bit easier to read and comprehend a pattern. I like to go through and highlight rows that are in different colors. Sometimes at the beginning of a row it says CC to a different color, like to white or black or green or purple or whatever color it might be by chance. But sometimes I go through and I highlight those so I don't forget to change my color of yarn, because sometimes I've definitely done that where I haven't changed my color and then I've realized like a row or two too late, and then I have to go back, of course. But again, if you have to frog things, it's really not a big deal, okay? I promise. Everybody does it, but Just make sure you go through and you highlight anything that you think you might forget as you go through, which is also another reason I like to skim through my patterns before I start. Feel free to use a sticky note on your patterns if you print them off, so you can like put the sticky note over all of the rows that you haven't done yet, and so the row right above it will be whatever row that you're working on. I definitely did this when I was printing out my patterns, and I found it very helpful to use that, or like a pad of paper or a pen even, to put it like right where I was working at and stuff without writing on the actual page. It helps me keep track of where I'm at, especially if it's a very complicated, detailed kind of pattern, or you have a lot of rows that are very similar but just a little bit off, like on color changes or something. This definitely makes it more helpful to understand them and make sure you don't mess anything up. I think reading a pattern line out loud, kind of like a sentence more like than the actual abbreviations, is also very helpful to help you start memorizing those terms. Like if I had this on my pattern, I would honestly just go, okay, single crochet, and then 2 single crochets in the same stitch. Like that's how I read it in my mind whenever I'm actually working on it, and I feel like it helped me memorize those abbreviations a little bit faster and kind of let those sink in. And it also helped me keep track of exactly what I was doing, so I didn't accidentally do my increase too soon, or I didn't actually do like only increases, because I know that those two sound similar whenever you're reading the abbreviations, but they're not. I also suggest going ahead and downloading some patterns that also have videos with them. Quite a few creators over here on YouTube post tutorial videos, but then they link down in the description, like the link to their Etsy, to buy the actual PDF patterns. And I think that this is a wonderful tool to help you start memorizing and learning how to do these things. If you have the written pattern pulled up while you're watching the video, it kind of helps link those 2 dots in your head. It's kind of like watching like a movie with subtitles when you can't quite tell what they're saying, but it really does help you understand what they're trying to get at, and it helps you memorize it for the next time you work on an actual pattern. And that's how you can make some adorable little plushies like I do. I've made so many lately. As you can see, they're all back there, they're all back here, they're back there, they're everywhere. I need to tag a bunch of stuff for my next market, okay? But I hope that this helps all of my little newbie beginner crocheters that are out there watching. Please, please, please leave any comments, or if something was confusing, let me know down below. I would love to help answer any other questions that you might have as a beginner, because I know that it can be intimidating at first, and I love teaching people. I love helping people. I would love to help you. So if you have any questions, please drop them down below. But again, let me know. Do you write out, or do you download your patterns and print them out, or do you just keep them on your tablet? Because I really want to know. I kind of want to take like a little poll almost to see what everybody does. And that is all I have for today. So if you need anything, please, please, please leave a little notepad emoji down in the comments below, like a little pen and paper notepad, like you took notes today, like you learned something today from this video. And most importantly, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for hanging out. I love you guys. I hope you have a great week of crocheting. I'm sorry I didn't have more crochet to show off this week, but I haven't been feeling the greatest, so I wanted to go ahead and still give you guys a video though. So I will be back with a bigger, longer video next week, hopefully. So if you need anything, you know where to find me, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye!